Happy Thursday out there, folks. This is Darius Dale here to present our macro minute for Thursday, July 7th, 2022. Starting with asset markets here. Stocks up this morning, commodities up, crypto mixed, dollar down, global bond yields mixed. Market moving headlines, reading the global tea leaves for big tech, particularly heading into earnings season. So Samsung Electronics reported a better than anticipated 21% jump in revenue, assuaging investors' worst fears about the impact of weakening consumer demand and soaring materials costs. Samsung's narrow sales beat offset weaker than expected operating profit, reflecting margin pressures from rising inflation. Operating profit grew at its slowest pace in more than 2 years to 14 trillion yuan, which is around 10.7 billion in 2Q, versus the 14.6 trillion yuan projected. It posted sales of 77 trillion yuan, helped by a weakening of the Korean won, which I believe was down somewhere between 6 and 7% in the second quarter. Guess what? U.S. companies don't have a weakening currency that's down 6 to 7% in the second quarter. So that's going to, whatever you're feeling about South Korea's sales beat this morning, you might have to feel the exact opposite about some of our U.S. multinationals in Q2 earnings season. But anyway, Samsung was up 3.2%. It's down 11% month over month, inclusive of that bounce. So it's telling you that, hey, we didn't retrace a significant portion of the decline, on this news, which tells you that the buy side was not as bearish as the sell side was on the print. Shifting gears from the Fed's perspective, a mere negative 32,000 statistic won't cut it. So we got U.S. Job cut announcements from Challenger this morning. They rose 59% in June year over year. That's the fastest rate we've seen it since December of 2020. This is the total number is 32,517 job cut announcements, bringing the cumulative total this year to a mere 133,211. The automotive sector announced the most cuts, consistent with obviously Elon's call outs in Tesla. Quote unquote, employers are beginning to respond to the financial pressures and slowing demand by cutting costs, quote unquote, for Andrew Challenger, which is the firm's senior vice president. We talked about the profit cycle, how it's likely to eventually impact the labor cycle. We're very early innings in terms of the degradation for both of those cycles. So do not expect a Fed pivot and do not expect a durable bottom in risk assets until we get much further along in those cycles. And then lastly, zero COVID equals more stimulus for now in China. So China's Ministry of Finance was considering allowing local governments to sell 1.5 trillion yuan, which is around 220 billion special bonds this year, which would be an unprecedented acceleration of infrastructure funding into the back half of the year. Typically, China likes to front load a lot of the infrastructure development and all the capital raising associated with that. So big movers this morning. Germany's DAX up nearly 2% to down 12% month over month. WTI crude oil, nice bounces, up 3% to down 13% month over month. Got the whole commodity complex rising as well. Bloomberg Agricultural Index up 2.6% to down 14% month over month. Bloomberg Industrial Metals Index up 2.7% to down 20% month over month. Both those latter indices continue to still be oversold, inclusive of today's bounce. Looking at the volatility adjusted momentum signals and probable ranges, U.S. dollar index, that's bullish VAMs, nearly oversold with 1.9% of downside to the low boundary. It's probable range. Gold, bearish VAMs at the low, oversold at the lower boundary. It's probable range is taking a bath here. 10-year U.S. nominal Treasury yield, that is still oversold. Bullish VAMs. High yield credit spread, bullish VAM still. You got a little bit less upside, a little bit less downside relative to upside, 14 bips of downside versus 59 bips of upside to the upper boundary there. 50 or S&P 500, that is bearish VAMs. Bad risk reward setup. You got 1% upside with 6.1% downside. VIX neutral VAMs still in the middle of its probable range. Vol's been left for dead as a product, as an asset class. It probably won't by the fall of this year, but certainly for now, it's still left for dead. NASDAQ 100 bearish VAMs. That's nearing overbought territory at 0.8% of upside with 8% of medium-term downside. Russell 2000, that is bearish VAMs, 1.8% of upside versus 6.7% of downside. Bitcoin bearish VAMs, not a great risk reward setup in digital assets here, 4% of upside, 13% of downside. Same thing with Ethereum bearish VAMs, 3% of upside with 20% of downside. So be aware of that if you bought the dip or dollar cost averaging. We like to do with this program. I'm not a big fan of dollar cost averaging just blindly. I like to use the cycle, the liquidity cycle, the growth cycle, the inflation cycle, the profit cycle to speed up or accelerate your dollar cost averaging, particularly in the context of our probable range process. That's something we help investors do at 42 Macro in our lead off morning notes and in our around the horns. But anyway, if you are a dollar cost averager in Bitcoin or Ethereum, you might want to slow the rate of those purchases heading into the upper bound of the probable ranges, which have been rejected several times throughout this bear market. Shanghai Composite, bullish VAMs here, get a little bit better risk reward setup in China here in recent days and weeks, minus 1.7% of downside versus 3.4% of upside. WTI crude oil bouncing 3%, still oversold with 21% immediate term upside to the upper boundary with the probable range. Ag, bearish VAMs, still deeply oversold, even though it's bouncing here. Same thing with industrial metals. Bearish VAMs still oversold. Or I should actually note the bearish side, take that back. Industrial metals are not oversold. You got 3.8% of downside versus 7.9% of upside. So with that, Darius Dale presenting our macro minute for Thursday, July 7, 2022. And we're going to do a big deep dive on recession risks, how they get priced in, et cetera, in our macro scouting report tomorrow afternoon for the month of July. If you do not sign up for that, you're not going to get it. So guess what? Subscribe. Cheers.